You don't know who I am, do you?
Faith Young stared at the stranger on her porch. Young white man, expensive coat, tears streaming down both cheeks. He held up a faded blue blanket. Then, a pair of old gray socks. Worn out, the floral pattern almost gone. Faith held her breath.
A woman put these socks on my feet when I was 6. Starving. Freezing. Thrown out by my own parents like I was nothing.
His voice broke.
She fed me warm soup, sip by sip, because my stomach had been empty so long it couldn't take real food. She gave me her only coat. Her only blankets. Everything.
He looked into her eyes.
That woman is you. I've spent 3 years searching for you.
Faith's hand flew to her mouth. But to understand what that moment meant, you have to go back 18 years to a life that looked nothing like a fairy tale. Barston, North Carolina, a small working-class town where everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew Faith Young. She lived in a rented 2-bedroom house on Caldwell Street, peeling paint on the outside, a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and smoked paprika, no matter how many bills were piling up on the counter. Faith was 42, single mother, 1 daughter, Nyla, 14 years old, 2 jobs, every single day. Mornings, she worked as a janitor at Barston Elementary School. Evenings and weekends, she ran a tiny home catering business she called Faith's Table. Her alarm went off at 4:45 every morning. Every single morning. She'd pack Nyla's lunch before her own coffee was even brewed, iron her janitor uniform on a board set up in the hallway, because there was no space anywhere else. Catch the 5:50 bus with her hands still smelling like garlic from last night's cooking. Those hands told her whole story. Calloused. Rough. A burn scar across her left wrist from a grease splatter she never got treated. She just wrapped it in a bandage every morning and kept going. On the fridge door, 3 bills held up by a magnet: electric, water, and a past-due notice from the landlord. Red letters. Every Sunday night, Faith sat at the kitchen table with an envelope and a pencil, flipping it over, doing the math on the back. The catering brought in maybe $300, sometimes $500 a month. But her customers were mostly neighbors, and neighbors sometimes paid late. And Faith? She never pressed them. Not once. One time, old Dolores Williams from next door tried to hand her a $20 bill after Faith brought over a full tray of mac and cheese, just because she knew Dee hadn't been feeling well. Faith pushed the money back. "Put that away, Dee. You need it more than I do." "Girl, you need it more than I do," Dee shot back. Faith just smiled. That tired, warm, stubborn smile she always wore. The one that almost hid the exhaustion behind her eyes. She hummed gospel songs while mopping the school hallways. She talked to God out loud while she cooked, not in some dramatic way, just casually, like he was sitting right there at the table. "Lord, I know you got a plan. I just wish you'd send me a hint every now and then." Nyla would roll her eyes from the doorway. "Mama, you're talking to the stove again." "I'm not talking to the stove, baby. I'm talking to the man who keeps this stove running." Nyla was smart, quiet, kept a journal she never let anyone read. She was applying to a summer arts program at the Carolina Arts Academy. Cost? $1,200. Faith didn't have $1,200. She didn't have 1,200 cents. But behind the flour tin in the back of the pantry, hidden where Nyla would never look, sat a mason jar. Inside it, folded bills. 5s, 10s, a few 1s. Every spare dollar Faith could scrape together, she put in that jar. Nyla didn't know about it. "We're not poor, baby," Faith told her once, pulling her close. "We're just pre-blessed." She said it with a grin. But that night, after Nyla went to sleep, Faith sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at the bills on the fridge. She didn't grin then. Everyone on Caldwell Street knew who Faith was. She was the one who shoveled Dee's walkway in winter without being asked. She was the one who brought foil-wrapped plates to the family whose father just lost his job. Pastor Calvin Davis at Greater Hope AME Church once said from the pulpit, "You want to see what the Lord's hands look like on this earth? Go watch Faith Young carry a casserole across the street in the rain." But Faith's hands were tired. The oven, the backbone of Faith's table, had been making a grinding noise for weeks. A repairman took one look and quoted her $850. She didn't have it. She'd been borrowing Dee's oven on weekends. But Dee's health was declining. Slower steps, shorter breath. And Faith hated adding to her burden. Some nights, Faith lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running numbers in her head, wondering if Faith's table would survive another month. And here's the thing you need to know about Barston. Just 12 miles north sat Ridgemont, a whole different world. Gated estates, horse farms, old money. The kind of place where people had kitchen islands bigger than Faith's entire house. Every time Faith took the highway, she drove right past the Ridgemont exit. She never had a reason to take it. Not once in 42 years. But that was about to change. Because what Faith didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the coldest night of the year was coming, and it would bring something to her doorstep that would connect her life to Ridgemont in ways she never imagined. It was a Tuesday night in late January, and what Faith found on Old Mill Road would haunt her for years. Not because of how terrible it was, but because of what it set into motion. Temperature dropping fast, 28 degrees, freezing rain turning the roads into glass. Faith was driving home from a catering drop-off in her dented 2009 Honda Civic. Heater barely worked. A blanket draped over her lap to stop her legs from going numb. Exhausted. Eyes heavy. A 4:45 alarm waiting at home. Old Mill Road. A dark, unlit, two-lane stretch between Barston and Ridgemont. No streetlights. No houses. Just trees and sleet hitting the windshield. Her headlights swept across something near the drainage ditch. Something small. She almost drove past. Almost. Her foot eased off the gas. She squinted through the rain. A child. A small white boy, maybe 5, maybe 6, sitting on the frozen ground in a thin t-shirt and pajama bottoms. No shoes. No coat. No one around. He wasn't crying. Wasn't calling for help. Just sitting there, arms around his knees, staring at nothing. Like he'd given up waiting for anyone to come. Faith's hands tightened on the wheel. Her first instinct, stop, right now. Her second instinct, the one born from a lifetime of being a black woman in America, whispered something else. Be careful. A black woman, alone. Dark road. A white child in the middle of the night. She knew what that looked like. She knew the headlines. She knew how that story would end for someone who looked like her. Her heart hammered. But the boy wasn't moving. The sleet was heavier now, and even from inside the car, his lips had turned blue. Faith pulled over. She stepped into the freezing rain, approached slowly, hands visible, voice soft. Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me? Where's your mama? The boy flinched, but didn't run. Up close, worse than she thought. Ribs pressing through the t-shirt like they were trying to escape his body. Collarbones jutting out, two sharp ridges under paper-thin skin. Eyes sunken deep into their sockets, ringed with dark circles so black they looked painted on. Cheeks hollowed out, skin pulled tight against jawbone. This child hadn't missed a meal. This child had been starving, slowly, systematically, for months. The kind of hunger that doesn't scream. It quietly eats a body from the inside out. He looked up at her, eyes glassy, barely focused. One word. Cold. Something cracked open inside Faith's chest. She looked up and down the road. No cars, no headlights. She pulled out her phone. One bar. Dialed 911. The call dropped. Tried again. Nothing. The sleet was turning to ice. The boy's whole body trembling now. Shallow, rapid breaths. Running out of time. Two choices. Wait for a signal and pray, or take him. She didn't hesitate. She unwrapped the blanket from her own lap and wrapped it around him, picked him up, and almost gasped. He weighed nothing. Not light for his age, nothing. Wrong, nothing. The kind of lightness that tells you a body has been consuming itself to stay alive. Every rib under her hands, every vertebra along his spine, like holding a bundle of sticks wrapped in skin. She laid him across the back seat, cranked the heat to maximum. The vents blew lukewarm air. Not enough. She pulled off her own coat, the only coat she owned, and draped it over him. Then she drove, fast. Too fast for the ice, fishtailed once on a curve, gripped the wheel, kept going. She talked to him the whole way. Not questions, just comfort. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. I got you. You hear me? I got you. He didn't answer, but in the rearview mirror, his eyes followed her voice. When she carried him through her front door, something fell from where he'd been clutching it against his chest. A small blanket. Blue, but not like any blanket Faith had ever touched. Cashmere. Soft, unmistakably expensive. The kind of fabric that didn't belong anywhere near a starving child on a frozen road. In the corner, embroidered in silver thread, two initials, T.M. Faith noticed, but she was too focused on the boy to think about it. She set the blanket aside and carried him to the couch. She didn't know it yet, but those two letters would unravel a secret connecting this dying child to one of the wealthiest families in the state. And that secret would change Faith's life forever. Faith had pulled him out of the cold. But saving his life, that was going to take more. And it would cost her in ways she didn't yet understand. She laid Ethan on the couch, wrapped him in every blanket she owned, the quilt from her bed, the throw from the armchair, the old Afghan her mother had crocheted years ago. His body was still trembling. Not shivering anymore. Trembling. A deep, involuntary shaking that came from somewhere beneath the muscles, like his bones themselves were cold. Faith moved fast. She lit the stove, heated chicken broth in a small pot, poured it into a bowl, grabbed a spoon. She sat beside him, lifted his head gently, brought the spoon to his lips. He tried to swallow. Too fast. He coughed, a wet, hollow sound that echoed through the quiet house. His stomach had been empty for so long it had forgotten how to receive food. His body was rejecting the very thing it needed to survive. Faith pulled the spoon back, waited, tried again. Smaller this time, just a sip. barely enough to wet his tongue. He swallowed, kept it down. Another sip, then another. Slow, patient, one tiny spoonful at a time. His fingers were too weak to hold the bowl. She steadied his hands with hers. His fingers were skeletal, ice cold, every knuckle visible through translucent skin. She could feel the bones shifting under her grip like loose pebbles. She checked his feet. Not frostbitten, but close. She filled the basin with warm water and eased his toes in. He whimpered. She started humming, low and soft. An old gospel hymn her grandmother used to sing. He stopped whimpering. His eyes stayed locked on her face, like her voice was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Minutes passed. The color in his face changed, slowly, almost imperceptibly, from gray to something approaching alive. Then a sound from the hallway. Nyla stood there in her pajamas, bare feet on the cold floor, staring at the boy on the couch. Faith looked up. "Mama." "It's okay, baby. I found him on the road. He's sick. He needs help." Nyla didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She didn't freeze. She turned around, went to her room, came back carrying her own pillow and a pair of old socks. Gray, too big for him, with a faded floral pattern. She knelt down beside the couch. Gently, so gently, she slid the socks onto his feet. One foot, then the other, without a word. Then she looked up at Faith. "Mama, how long since he ate?" Faith didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both already knew. Over the next hour, warmth crept back into his body, and with it, words. Small ones, broken ones, whispered like secrets. His name was Ethan. He was 6. He was outside because Daddy said go outside. He didn't know for how long. He didn't know what day it was. Faith leaned in close. "Sweetheart, when was the last time you ate? Do you remember?" Ethan looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Then, barely audible, "I don't remember." Not yesterday, not this morning, not a few days ago. I don't remember. The distance between his last meal and this moment was so vast that a 6-year-old mind couldn't measure it. Faith closed her eyes, drew a breath, opened them. She asked where his house was. He pointed vaguely toward the road. "The brown one, with the dogs." Faith knew the area, a cluster of run-down rentals off Old Mill Road, closer to the Ridgemont side. She looked at his body again. Ribs visible through the t-shirt, every single one. Arms thin as sticks. A belly swollen in that terrible way, the kind of swelling that doesn't come from eating too much, but from eating nothing at all for so long, the body starts to consume itself. This wasn't a child who'd been neglected for a few days. This was a child who'd been starved, deliberately, systematically, for weeks, maybe months. Faith picked up the phone, this time not just to report a found child. "I need to report suspected child neglect and starvation." She knew what this call meant. Interviews, questions, scrutiny. She knew that as a black woman reporting white parents, the system might look at her sideways long before it looked at them. She made the call anyway. 90 minutes later, the ambulance finally arrived. 2 paramedics assessed Ethan. The lead paramedic, a woman named Anderson, was quiet for a long time as she worked. Then she looked up at Faith. Her voice was low, steady, but her eyes said everything. His body weight is roughly 60% of normal for a 6-year-old. Severe chronic malnutrition, dehydration, brittle hair. His nails are splitting. Reflexes are delayed. She paused. "Ma'am, another hour out there, and we'd be having a very different conversation right now." Faith closed her eyes. She didn't need Anderson to finish that sentence. They loaded Ethan onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, he reached out, suddenly, desperately, and grabbed Faith's hand. He held on with a strength that shouldn't have been possible in a body that weak. He looked at her, those sunken eyes, that hollowed face. "Are you my grandma?" Faith's throat closed. She shook her head. "No, baby, I'm not your grandma, but I'm right here." He didn't let go. Not until the paramedic gently, finger by finger, pried his hand loose. Faith stood on her porch and watched the ambulance pull away, red lights fading into the gray dawn. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes. No coat. Freezing. She had to be at work in 2 hours. She went inside, sat at the kitchen table, put her head in her hands. She didn't cry. She prayed. While CPS processed the scene, a caseworker, Ms. Harmon, asked Faith about the child's belongings. Faith mentioned the blanket. "It's real nice material, cashmere or something. Got 2 letters stitched in the corner." Ms. Harmon looked at the blanket, turned it over, saw the initials, T.M., and went very still. She excused herself, made a phone call in the other room. Faith couldn't hear the conversation, but she noticed something shift. When Harmon came back, she stood straighter, spoke more carefully, chose her words like each one mattered. Something about those 2 letters had changed the temperature in the room. But Faith was too exhausted to think about it. She didn't know what those initials meant. She didn't know who T.M. was, and she had no idea that a single phone call by a CPS caseworker had just set something enormous into motion, something that would take 18 years to reach her door. Faith had done everything right. She'd saved a child's life. But instead of a thank you, what came knocking next was suspicion. It started before the ambulance even left. 2 police officers arrived with the paramedics. One, Officer Bradley, stepped inside and looked around. Slowly, deliberately. His eyes moved across the peeling paint, the worn-out sofa, the tiny kitchen. Then his eyes landed on Faith. "Where exactly did you find the child?" "Old Mill Road, near the drainage ditch." "Why were you driving on that road at midnight?" "I was coming back from a catering delivery." "You picked up a child who is not yours, put him in your vehicle, brought him to your home, and did not contact police immediately?" "My phone had no signal. The sleet was—" "Are you aware that transporting a minor who is not your own child without proper authorities could be considered kidnapping?" The word hit her like a slap. Kidnapping. She saved a child from freezing to death and was being asked about kidnapping. Bradley looked around the house again. The chipped countertops, the fridge with bills pinned under a magnet, one stamped in red. He didn't say what he was thinking. He didn't have to. Faith could read it behind his eyes. A black woman in a house like this, alone, at night, with a white child who wasn't hers. The look that judged before it listened. She'd been reading it her entire life. From the hallway, Nyla watched, fists tight, eyes red, not from fear, from anger. The first time she'd seen it so clearly. The thing her mother carried silently for 42 years, laid bare in their own living room. At dawn, CPS caseworker Ms. Harmon returned, not to thank Faith. "We need to verify you were not involved in the child's condition. Standard procedure." Faith knew standard procedure didn't land the same on every doorstep. They opened her fridge. Nearly empty. Leftover rice, a carton of milk, half a bottle of hot sauce. They checked her pantry, medicine cabinet, Nyla's bedroom. Faith stood in the middle of her own living room, watching strangers search her home. They were checking whether she had enough food. A woman who had just fed a starving child, investigated for not having enough food. The irony didn't need to be spoken. It hung in the air like smoke. On Caldwell Street, neighbors noticed. Police car and CPS van outside Faith's house from midnight to morning. Curtains moved. Whispers started. Most people on the block knew Faith, trusted her, but a few glances were enough. Next day at work, a coworker leaned in during break. "Hey, Faith, heard there was some police situation at your house last night." Faith picked up her mop and walked away. 2 days later, Bradley came back. The hospital had confirmed severe, chronic malnutrition. Bradley had one more question. "What exactly did you feed the child during the time he was in your home?" The question sounded neutral. It wasn't. He was checking whether a poor black woman with a near-empty fridge was capable of feeding a child. Whether her poverty was evidence. Faith looked him straight in the eye. "I fed him chicken broth, 1 spoonful at a time, because a stomach that's been empty that long can't handle solid food." She paused. "I know that because I've been hungry before." Bradley wrote something down, left without a word. 1 week later, a letter, official, Barston County Department of Social Services. No charges filed. No apology, no phone call, no acknowledgement she'd done anything right. Just a cold, administrative clearing of her name. Faith read it, folded it, put it in the junk drawer. That night, after Nyla fell asleep, Faith sat at the kitchen table alone. House dark, fridge humming. A question crept in that scared her more than anything Bradley had said. If I found another child on that road tomorrow, would I stop? The answer should have been instant. It wasn't. She had to think. Just a few seconds. A small hesitation, a crack in something that used to be solid. The system had taken those seconds from her, planted a pause in a heart that never paused before. She let it burn. Then she bowed her head. Yes, always yes. But those few seconds, she would never forget them. And what Faith didn't know, 18 years later, a man would sit across from her and tell her that someone powerful had read every word of that investigation, every question Bradley asked, every room they searched. And that man had slammed his fist on a table and said, "I will find her, and I will make this right." The days that followed were quiet. Faith tried to go back to normal, but normal had shifted, and she didn't realize how much yet. She went to work the next morning on 3 hours of sleep, mopped the hallways, wiped down the cafeteria tables, didn't say a word about what happened. When Dee asked why she looked so tired, Faith just shrugged. "Long night." That was all. A few days later, a reporter from the Barston Gazette called, Sharon Taylor. She'd found the story on the police blotter and wanted an interview. Faith said no. Sharon showed up at the house anyway, knocked on the screen door with a notebook and a recorder. Faith stood behind the screen, polite, firm. "I didn't do anything special, ma'am. I just did what anyone would do." "Miss Young, most people would have kept driving." "Then most people need to do better." Sharon wrote the story anyway. Faith was described only as a local resident who wished to remain anonymous. The article ran on page 6 of a newspaper that most of Boston had stopped reading years ago. Almost nobody saw it. The following week, the school principal, who'd heard through the grapevine, left an envelope in Faith's locker. Inside, $100 in cash and an unsigned note. "For what you did." Faith tried to give it back. The principal refused. She used most of it for groceries. The remaining $22 went into the mason jar behind the flour tin, Nyla's fund. Then she called the hospital. "I'm calling about a child who was brought in last Tuesday night. His name is Ethan. I'm the one who—" "Are you a family member?" "No, but I'm sorry, ma'am. We can only release information to immediate family." She called CPS. Same answer. "The case is under active investigation. The child is in safe care. That's all we can share." Faith hung up, sat in the kitchen, stared at the phone. She'd known this boy for a few hours, fed him soup, held his hands, hummed him a hymn while his feet soaked in warm water. So why did she feel like she'd lost something? 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the Boston County Department of Social Services, a formal commendation, a certificate thanking her for her civic contribution. Inside the envelope, a $250 Visa gift card described as a token of appreciation. Faith looked at it for a long time. She hung the certificate on the fridge, right next to the overdue bills. The gift card? She gave it to Dee. "Mama," Nyla protested, "that's yours. You earned it." "Baby, that money wasn't meant for us. It needs to go where it's needed." Dee used it for her prescriptions that month. But here's what almost got lost. Tucked behind the certificate, easy to miss, was a small business card. White, simple, expensive paper. Crestline Developments, building legacies since 1968. On the back, handwritten in neat, careful script, "Thank you, T.M." Faith turned it over. Didn't recognize the name, didn't recognize the company. She tossed it in the junk drawer next to dead batteries and takeout menus, and forgot about it completely. She had no idea that those two initials, T.M., were the same initials embroidered on a small blue cashmere blanket, and that the man who wrote that note had already begun searching for her. Months passed, then years. Faith's life moved on, but something had been set in motion that she couldn't see. Not yet. 2 years later, Faith's table was barely alive. The oven had died completely. She'd been borrowing the kitchen at Greater Hope AME Church on weekends. Pastor Davis gave her the keys without asking for $1. But it wasn't sustainable. Some weeks she could only cook Saturday mornings. Nyla got into the summer arts program on a partial scholarship. Faith covered the rest with extra cleaning shifts at a dentist's office. 3 jobs now. The mason jar was empty again. Then something strange happened. Faith was catering a retirement party at the local Elks Lodge. Her usual spread, pulled pork, cornbread, collard greens. A man stood in the corner. White, mid-60s, silver hair, tailored suit that didn't belong at an Elks Lodge party. A watch that cost more than Faith's car. He took a plate, ate slowly, deliberately. like he was studying each bite. He turned to the host. "Who made this food?" The host pointed at Faith. The man watched her for a long moment, then left without introducing himself. The next week, unknown number on Faith's phone, a polished, professional voice. "Is this Faith's table? We'd like to book you for a private dinner in Ridgemont. 30 guests, $2,000. Faith nearly dropped the phone. She'd never had a job half that size. The dinner was in Ridgemont. Iron gates, gravel driveway, staff in uniforms, a kitchen bigger than her entire house. She cooked 4 hours straight. Guests raved. At the end of the night, a staff member approached her. "The homeowner wanted me to tell you, your food reminds him of someone who once showed extraordinary kindness. He said you should be very proud." Faith drove home with a $2,000 check and a strange feeling she couldn't explain. 3 weeks later, digging through her junk drawer for a screwdriver, Faith found the old business card. Crestline Developments. She hadn't thought about it in 2 years. This time, she Googled it. Her eyes went wide. Crestline Developments, a $400 million real estate and hospitality empire, headquartered in Ridgemont, owned by the Moore family, founded by Theodore Ted Moore. T.M. She looked at the card. T.M. She remembered the blanket, the small blue cashmere blanket with silver initials in the corner. T.M. Her hands started to shake. But before she could connect the man at the Elks Lodge, the Ridgemont dinner, the business card, and the blanket, the answer was already on its way to her front door. And then came the knock. The one that changed everything. Saturday morning, late October. Faith was in the kitchen, flour on her apron, gospel on the radio. 3 knocks on the front door. She wiped her hands, opened it. A young white man stood on her porch, 24, tall, tailored navy coat, eyes blue, and red-rimmed, like he'd been holding something in for years. In his hands, a faded blue cashmere blanket, a child's blanket, and next to it, a pair of old gray socks, stretched out, floral pattern barely visible. Faith looked at his face. Something tugged at the back of her mind. The jawline, the way he stood, weight on one foot, hunched, trying to take up less space. She'd seen that posture before, on a 6-year-old boy in a frozen ditch. Her breath caught. "Ms. Young, my name is Ethan Moore." Her knees buckled. She grabbed the door frame. 18 years ago, on the coldest night of the year, you found me on Old Mill Road, starving, freezing, left outside by my own parents. His voice cracked. You carried me to your car. You fed me warm soup, 1 sip at a time, because my stomach had been empty so long it couldn't take real food. He lifted the socks. Your daughter put these on my feet. She didn't say a word. She just knelt down and put them on. Tears ran down his face. I've kept them. Every home, every move, every year. They were the first kind thing anyone ever gave me. He steadied himself. I've been searching for you for 3 years. Faith pulled him inside. Coffee, trembling hands, the blanket and socks laid on the kitchen table between them like sacred objects. Ethan talked. Faith listened. After she rescued him, CPS removed him from his parents, Brenda and Craig Moore. Craig was the estranged son of Theodore Moore, founder of Crestline Developments. He'd cut ties with the Moore family years earlier. Drugs, alcohol, a downward spiral that dragged Brenda with him. They'd stopped functioning as parents. Ethan was invisible in his own home, unfed, forgotten. When they were too drunk or high to remember they had a son, he survived on scraps from the trash. They hid him from the family. Ted Moore didn't even know he had a grandson. Until CPS found the blanket. The blue cashmere blanket, TM, had been custom made by Ted for his first grandchild, a gift sent through an intermediary. He never knew if it arrived. When CPS traced the initials to the Moore estate, Ted learned he had a grandson, and that his grandson had nearly starved to death. 14 months of legal battle. Craig and Brenda's parental rights terminated for severe neglect and systematic starvation. Ted granted custody. Ethan moved into the Ridgemont estate at age 8. The same estate where Faith would unknowingly cater a dinner years later. The man at the Elks Lodge who watched you cook, that was my grandfather. He'd been searching for you for years, working from the CPS file in a newspaper article that never printed your name. Ethan paused. When he tasted your food and heard your name, he knew. The Ridgemont dinner was his way of seeing who you really were. Faith sat still, the pieces clicking together. The business card, the initials, the homeowner's message, someone who once showed extraordinary kindness. Then Ethan stopped. His face darkened. Ms. Young, my grandfather hired a lawyer to pull the full investigation file. Faith's hands went still. He read everything. Every question that officer asked you. The kidnapping accusation, the home inspection, how they opened your fridge and checked your cabinets, like your poverty was proof you'd starve a child. His jaw tightened. When he finished reading, he slammed his fist on the table. I'd never seen him that angry. He said, "This woman saved your life. She fed you when your own parents wouldn't, and they treated her like a criminal. I will find her, and I will make this right." Silence. 18 years Faith had carried that night alone. The interrogation, the home search, the word kidnapping, the letter that cleared her name but never said sorry, the seconds of hesitation she could never forget. And now, for the first time, someone said out loud what she'd never been able to say herself. What they did to you was wrong. She looked at Ethan, at the blanket, at the socks, at the man who had once been a silent boy with blue lips and hollow eyes. "I thought about you," she whispered. "Every day. I called the hospital. They wouldn't tell me anything. Called CPS. Same thing. I just had to pray you were okay." She wiped her eyes. "I never even knew your last name." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "You didn't need to know my name, Ms. Young. You just needed to stop the car." And she did. On a night when everything told her not to, she stopped. That single act set off a chain she never saw. Her rescue led to CPS, which led to a blanket, which led to a grandfather discovering a grandson he never knew existed, which led to a boy being saved twice. Once from the cold, and once from the life that put him there. Every clue connected. The blanket, the initials, Harmon's phone call, the stranger at the Elks Lodge, the Ridgemont dinner, the business card in the junk drawer. But Ethan wasn't done. He didn't come back just to tell Faith what happened. He came with something else. something she never could have imagined. Ethan didn't come back just to say thank you. He came with something that would change Faith's life forever. The kitchen was quiet, coffee getting cold, the blanket and socks still on the table. Ethan wiped his eyes. His voice shifted, steadier, focused, like a man who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. Ms. Young, I graduated from Duke University, Business and Hospitality Management. I run the culinary division of Crestline Developments, under my grandfather. Faith listened, not sure where this was going. Crestline is building a community center and marketplace in downtown Barston. $12 million project. Bring jobs, bring life back to this part of town. He leaned forward. The centerpiece is a flagship restaurant. We want you to run it. Faith blinked, not as an employee, as an owner-operator and equity partner. Crestline covers the full build-out, construction, equipment, staffing, first 2 years of operating costs. You own 40% from day one. Path to 60% over 5 years. He paused. The restaurant will be called Faith's Table. Faith stared at him. Then she laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind that comes when your brain can't process what your ears just heard. Ethan, I cook out of a church kitchen. I can barely make rent. You want me to run a restaurant? Ethan smiled. Ms. Young, I've eaten at restaurants in New York, Paris, Tokyo, Michelin-starred places all over the world. He looked at her. Your pulled pork and cornbread is the best meal I've ever had. My grandfather agrees, and he's not a man who says that lightly. Faith shook her head, mouth open, no words. Then, tires on gravel outside. A black SUV pulled up in front of Faith's house, the kind of car that had never parked on Caldwell Street. Theodore Ted Moore stepped out, 82, silver hair, walking with a cane but carrying himself like a man who'd built empires with his bare hands. Because he had. He walked up the steps, stood in Faith's doorway. She recognized him now. The man at the Elks Lodge, the Ridgemont dinner. The man who'd been watching from a distance for years. He extended his hand. Miss Young, I have waited a very long time to shake the hand of the woman who gave me back my grandson. Faith took it, his hand trembling, not from weakness, from emotion. Everything I have, everything Ethan has, we owe to you stopping your car on that road. His voice dropped. Miss Young, I read the file. I know what they did to you after that night. Faith went still. They asked you about kidnapping. They searched your home, opened your refrigerator to check whether you, a woman who had just fed a starving child, had enough food. Ted gripped his cane. You saved a child dying of hunger, and they searched your cabinets to see if your poverty was evidence. That will never happen again. Not to you, not to anyone in this community. He straightened. This is not charity. This is an investment. I've seen what you can do with a borrowed pot and a church stove. I want to see what you do with a real kitchen. Faith was quiet for a long time. I have 2 conditions. Ted raised an eyebrow. 1, the restaurant hires local, people from Caldwell Street, people who need a shot. Ted nodded. 2, every Sunday we serve a free community meal. No questions, no sign-ups. Anyone who's hungry eats. Her voice went soft. Because no child should ever have to say, I don't remember, when you ask them when they last ate. Silence. 6-year-old Ethan's words hanging in the air, like a ghost. Ted looked at Ethan. Ethan nodded. Miss Young, you just made our investment even better. The following week, a law office in Ridgemont, long conference table, leather chairs. Faith brought Nyla, Dee, Pastor Davis. The partnership agreement sat on the table. Faith read every page. She picked up the pen, hand shaking. She signed. Nyla threw her arms around her so hard the chair slid back. Dee whispered, Lord, I always knew that woman was gonna be something. But Ethan wasn't finished. He slid a separate envelope across the table. This is for Nyla. Inside, a letter from the Carolina Arts Academy. Full enrollment. Year-round program. Tuition, $12,000. Covered in full. Renewable for 4 years. Faith stared at the letter. Looked at Nyla. Nyla read it. And screamed. A sound that bounced off the walls and made every lawyer in the room smile. Faith broke down. Not the quiet kind. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep you didn't know it was there. Years of mason jars and borrowed ovens and Sunday night math on the back of envelopes, all releasing at once. Nyla held her. Dee held her. Pastor Davis bowed his head. Ethan watched from across the table, holding a pair of old gray socks in his lap. The boy she'd fed with a spoon had just handed her a future she never dared to dream of. But this story doesn't end with Faith, because what she built, what they built together, changed a lot more than one woman's life. 14 months of construction. The Barston Community Marketplace rose from an abandoned lot on Drummond Avenue, cracked concrete and weeds that most people had stopped seeing years ago. Faith visited the site every week, hard hat over her head wrap, pointing at kitchen layouts, arguing, lovingly, with the architect about counter heights. Too high. I need to see my customers' faces when they take the first bite. She insisted the kitchen be open. No walls, no barriers. People should see who's cooking their food. That's how trust works. She hired 22 people from the Barston community. 3 were formerly incarcerated. Men turned away from dozens of jobs. Faith didn't ask about their records. She asked if they could show up on time. 2 were single mothers from Caldwell Street. Women who'd been doing the same Sunday night math on the back of envelopes. 1 was a 17-year-old from her block named James Anderson. Heading nowhere good. Skipping school. Running with people who didn't care if he lived or died. Faith found him on his front steps one afternoon. You want a job? Doing what? Washing dishes. Show up on time for 6 months. I'll teach you how to cook. James showed up on time, every single day. Opening night. Saturday in October. The line wrapped around the block. Simple menu, soul food done with extraordinary care. Smoked pulled pork, collard greens, mac and cheese, cornbread, peach cobbler. Fair prices, enormous portions. First customer through the door. Dee. 1 bite of cornbread and she started crying. Tastes the same as what you brought to my house that night. Same recipe? Same recipe, Dee. Same hands. Local news station WBTN covered the opening. The reporter, Sharon Taylor. The same woman who'd written the Barston Gazette article 18 years earlier. Page 6. Almost nobody read it. This time, Faith agreed to go on camera. The story went regional, then national. A food critic from the Charlotte Observer called Faith's Table the most important restaurant to open in North Carolina in a decade. Not for the food, though the food was extraordinary, but for what it represented. A national morning show aired the segment. Faith and Ethan side by side, telling their story. The host cried on air. The ripple effect hit Barston like a wave. Other businesses followed into the marketplace. A barber shop, a bookstore, a tutoring center, a small bakery run by one of the single mothers Faith hired, who'd learned enough in Faith's kitchen to start her own thing. Property values on Caldwell Street rose. Not enough to push anyone out, but enough that people started fixing porches, painting doors, taking pride in a block the world had overlooked for decades. Dee got her walkway repaved. A contractor volunteered after seeing the WBTN segment. Pastor Davis launched Faith Forward, a network of free community dinners at churches across the county. Inspired by Faith's Sunday meals, Nyla thrived at the Carolina Arts Academy. She started a documentary series about community food traditions in the rural South. Her first short film, The Table, was selected for a regional film festival. The subject? Her mother. Every Sunday, Faith's Table closed for regular business and opened its doors. No income requirements, no paperwork, no questions, just food. First Sunday, 80 people. Within 6 months, 300. Volunteers from the neighborhood ran the service. Ethan came every third Sunday. He always took the station by the door, greeting people as they walked in. The same welcome, just like Faith had once welcomed a freezing, starving boy into her home. In its first year, Faith's Table served over 15,000 free meals, employed 28 local residents, generated over $800,000 in revenue. Faith paid off every debt. Then she did something she'd dreamed about for 16 years. She bought the house on Caldwell Street, the one she'd been renting since Nyla was born. The landlord, the man who'd sent past due notices in red ink, sold it below market price. He handed her the keys. "You earned this, Faith, a long time ago." She stood in the doorway of her own home, truly hers for the first time, and ran her hand along the doorframe. The same doorframe she'd gripped the morning Ethan knocked. The same one she'd grabbed 18 years earlier, watching an ambulance carry a starving boy into the dawn, wondering if she'd ever know what happened to him. Now she knew. But the moment that stays with me, the one I keep coming back to, happened on a quiet evening, long after the cameras left. 1 year after the opening. A cold night in late January, almost 19 years after the night Faith found Ethan on Old Mill Road. Faith was closing up alone. Last Sunday meal guests gone home, tables wiped, chairs stacked, kitchen clean. She was untying her apron when she heard it. A knock on the glass door. A young black woman stood outside. Thin jacket, no gloves, a toddler on her hip, bundled in a blanket. She was shivering, eyes red, exhausted, scared. "I'm sorry. I know you're closed, but somebody told me this is the place where they don't turn you away." Faith didn't ask a question, didn't hesitate. She unlocked the door. "Come in, sweetheart." She turned the heat up, warmed cornbread and sweet potato soup, wrapped her own scarf around the woman's neck. The toddler fell asleep on a booth cushion, belly full, mouth still shiny with soup. The woman ate slowly, quietly, like someone who hadn't sat down in a long time. When she finished, her eyes drifted to the wall near the register. A framed newspaper clipping. The Barston Gazette article from 18 years ago. Page 6. The one almost nobody read. Next to it, In a shadow box, a pair of old gray socks, faded floral pattern, stretched thin. Below, a small blue cashmere blanket with silver initials, T.M. And beside all of it, a framed letter, official letterhead, 3 words, no charges filed. The woman pointed. What's all that about? Faith looked at the wall, the socks, the blanket, the letter. She smiled, that same warm, tired, real smile she'd carried her whole life. That's about how one cold night can turn into a whole lot of warm ones. You just gotta open the door. The woman looked at the framed letter. And that one? Something deeper moved behind Faith's eyes. That one's there to remind me. Doing the right thing doesn't mean you'll be treated right, but you still gotta do it. The woman held her gaze, then nodded slowly, like she understood more than the words. Faith packed food for the road, walked them to the car, watched them drive into the dark. Then she looked up. Faith's table, glowing gold against the black January sky. She pulled her apron tighter, went back inside. You might never find a starving child on a frozen road, but your moment will come. It might be smaller. It'll still matter. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And leave a comment. I want to know. Have you ever helped someone when everything told you not to? What happened? Dedicated to every act of kindness that was never recorded, never rewarded, and never forgotten.
Have you ever done something good and feel like it was all for nothing? Like you gave everything and got nothing back? Yeah, me too. But here's what I realized. The good you do is never wasted. Never. Even when nobody said it, even when nobody said thank you, even when they punish you for it, it doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere. It lands in someone's heart and it stays there. Years, decades, it doesn't matter. Real kindness doesn't expire. And here's the other thing. We always want to reward right now. We have someone and we look around like, okay, where's mine? But that's not how it works. Sometimes the seed you plant today won't bloom for years, and you might never see it all, but it blooms somewhere in someone you forgot about, in a life you didn't know you changed. But the hardest lesson, sometimes the world punishes you for being kind, and you have to be kind anyway. Not because it's easy, because it's who you are. You don't get to control how people treat you, but you always get to control who you are. That's the only thing that matters. Be good, even if nobody is watching, especially if nobody is watching. Tell me, has something good ever come back to you when you least expected it? Tell me in the comments. Like, share and subscribe. Real stories, real justice every week. And remember, the good you do is never wasted. It just takes time.